Anyway, I'm Dave Noon. I'm the vice president of the board of the Friends of the Juneau-Douglas City Museum, and here you see our board of directors. I guess we got to approve the minutes. That'll be next.
I think not show you. Okay.
Yeah, so
Maybe just introduce the rest of the board that's here.
oh yeah, rest of the board is here. So Mary Lou is not here. Kirk is here.
Last year's members, so just remember that's last year's member.
Mary Pat's here. Is Jean here?
Jean is not.
Jean is not here.
And Dawn.
And Marcia's
not. Dawn.
Oh, Dawn. Okay.
And Benita is on the Zoom call.
Okay. Benita is on the Zoom call. So
okay,
there we go.
So there's your call to order and your approval of so the next thing is the approval of the agenda.
Yeah. So let's take a look at the agenda. If we have that.
That's your agenda for this year.
Oh, there it is. Okay. So could we take a quick look at the agenda, assuming it all looks all right? If we could have a motion to approve and a second. Kirk makes a motion to approve. We have a second. All right. We have a second, Mary Pat. And assuming there's no objections, we'll just consider the meeting agenda to be approved. So let's take do we have what's next? We're all over the place.
Go back to the meeting minutes from a year ago. So then I'll just kind of go slowly through these. You can take a little quick look at some of the meeting minutes from a year ago.
And once everyone's had a chance to take a look at that, if we get a motion in a second, is there any, Mary Pat? Oh. Motion to approve last year's minutes. Mary Pat. And Kirk will second. Great. And now I guess we'll introduce Rorie Watt for update on the possibility of the new museum space. So
all right, make sure, am I in the right place?
I think so. I'm going to stop sharing so that everybody can focus on you.
Well, following on the theme, it's all probably my fault, whatever it might be that went wrong. But we've also got Robert Barr, our deputy city manager here.
And his fault.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, if it was good, I get credit. If it was bad, it was his fault, or maybe it's the other way around. Yeah, so we have $2 million. How about that? And let's just talk about how that came about. Some years ago, maybe 5-ish years, we were in one of our inexorable budget crunches. And somewhere along the way, we did, we call that a priority-driven budget exercise. And we invited the public to come in, and we said, okay, if you want to pay less for governmental services or you want reduced taxes, tell us how. It was an effort to engage the public, rank and score the things that we do. And maybe it was a great process, or maybe it wasn't a great process, but one of the results we got back was, I think in hindsight, kind of obvious. Essential services scored high and more elective services scored low. And what's essential and what's elective, eye of the beholder for sure. The museum ranked pretty low. Eagle Crest ranked pretty low. Capital Transit ranked pretty low. And I looked at the list and I thought, no way is the Assembly going to cut the museum, Eagle Crest, or Capital Transit. I mean, these are quality of life issues that make Juneau a good community. So anyway, in the back of my mind, I'm watching this and thinking, Simultaneously, the assembly passes kind of broad goals, and their goals are things like focus on deferred and facility maintenance and activate the waterfront and make it more of a year-round destination. And get in a position of a sustainable budget. So I think somewhere before COVID, I pitched an idea and I said, hey, why don't we move the museum to the waterfront? And likely that we can turn a better financial picture for the museum budget. Likely that we could get some outside funding for construction of a facility that shockingly would be purpose-built for its function, right? How about that? Like a space for the collection that was big and ample and had appropriate storage mechanisms, and climate control would not be extra, right? So that was the idea, and I pitched that and I said, this building, as much as people love it, was not built to be a museum. And the entire time that the museum is going to be here, we're probably going to be fighting that to a degree. And possibly this building has a use as a support for the capital. So in the long history of Juneau and its fight to be a good capital city, lots of ideas on how to do that and whether or not there should be a new capitol on Telephone Hill. But we've been on a path for a dispersed capital campus for some decades. Everything from the former Capitol School becoming the Terry Miller Building, or the Scottish Rite Temple becoming the Tom Stewart Building, or the recent purchase of the Assembly Building by the, thank you for coming, Wayne, the fund advisors, the Capital Fund Advisors, to create some housing units for the legislature, or the purchase of other buildings on the other side of Main Street for Lieutenant Governor's house and whatnot. We've been on this path that includes a substantial renovation of the Capitol building. So I think an open question of what are we doing here and what's the future look like? I thought connecting the dots to a waterfront museum made a lot of sense. It was not universally supported by the Assembly when I rolled it out. I think there were location concerns and or criticisms. There were questions about cost and operations, and there were questions about really whether that would be a good move for the museum. There were some on the Assembly that thought somewhere over in the Ock Village district would be a better location for a new museum, near the State Museum and near the Capitol Civic Center project, and possibly a city hall, and maybe a center of civic activity made more sense. I think there's a good rationale for that. I think there's a less good rationale for the self-sustaining or more self-sustaining nature of a museum trying to capture some tourists over in that location. So I think there's a locational question. I think there are funding questions about the waterfront. Certainly, we could leverage cruise ship passenger fees as partial support for a new building on the waterfront. Certainly, we don't have a plan. Actually, there is no master plan or ulterior plan. There's what I think personally was a pretty good idea, and I think 6 or 7 Assembly members thought it was a good enough idea to put on the sales tax. And we are $2 million closer to doing something different. And I don't think it's any more detailed than that. In I think a dutiful municipal way, we're going to have to develop a project and consider options, work with this group and the public. I think the museum director is going to need a steering committee. And I'm guessing that this group is going to be at least that group or a subset of it. In terms of timing, the sales tax that was approved in October, we will collect over the next 5 years. So the sales tax collection actually does not begin until October 1 of 23. So it's future sales tax. And in city budgeting process, we appropriate or make available for use tax receipts in advance of collecting them. So next July, we will appropriate those sales taxes that we will collect from September or October 1st of 23 through July 1 of 24. Years are getting away from us. There are a bunch of projects on the list. There will be jockeying about whose project goes first. Where do we start developing ideas? So on that list, we had all sorts of operational needs as well as capital investment needs. The museum will have to jockey in there and be saying, hey, we'd like some year one funding to get started on this. And we'd like to devote some staff resources to developing a plan, and that plan has got to include a space plan and a cost estimate and a confirmation of location and a public process and a business plan, and and oh, by the way, where's the rest of the money going to come from? Just spitballing the museum's needs several years ago, I think we anticipated about a $10 million project to build an appropriate museum for our current collections. And we would also bring into our centralized collections the art collection that we received from Billy Morris several years ago. A really nice collection of art that we've got carefully stored that I think ought to be shared with the public to the extent that we're able to, which right now is functionally not at all.
We could share a couple pieces.
Couple pieces, but there's, what, 179 pieces in that collection or something like that. I'd like to be able to share that. I'd like to be able to share the contents of this basement a little more. I think a new museum also presents a tremendous opportunity for us to work with the public, work with the tribes, and talk about our history, develop new displays, new exhibits. I think a name other than Juneau-Douglas City Museum probably is going to be in keeping with the times. So I think we have a lot of things to work with, and I think from the standpoint of the museum, really exciting. But we don't have a plan. I think step one is advocate and try and get in that first year of funding to start developing ideas on the details of what it should be. And you should not be bashful about that, because I can assure you that the competitors on that list are not going to be bashful about wanting their money first. Our 5 year of sales tax, what's 1 year of 1% of sales tax is 10.5 million, something like that. If we're slightly more, right? So that's what we're forecasting, how much people are going to spend and what's inflation going to do. But one year of 1%, let's say 10.5, maybe $11 million. So 5 years, 10.5, 11, something like that. And how the 2 million for the museum gets spread over those 5 years kind of depends. If there's activity that makes it look like we should move faster on this project, then we'll get more support from the assembly for bumping up the list. Funding sources that I proposed in the past, I actually asked the assembly for 4 million. There was a disagreement amongst some assembly members, and so the number was cut from 4 to 2. A couple of assembly members just weren't that enthusiastic about the project, quite frankly, which is all part of our process. That's all right. We have room for lots of opinions, but I think we had 6 out of the 9 liked it. Does that sound right? I think it was 6. 6 or 7, yeah. Passenger fees, I've made, we of course had like a 3-year lawsuit about the expenditure of passenger fees with the cruise ship. You can shake your head. I can shake my head more than you. About the legality of the expenditure of passenger fees. And if we choose a waterfront location, there's a good argument, and I have agreement on using passenger fees for some element of the facility. Probably at least 2 million, maybe even more. Basic argument is tourists would be using the facility, coming in, bathrooms, visitor information, and whatnot. So passenger fees is a funding source. I think we would be looking to Wayne's group with the fund advisors and seeing if there's a way that we could do a deal with the fund advisors and legislative affairs to repurpose this building to cement even further our status as capital city, and be trying to figure out how to support the legislature and the governor's office and their functions. I think at some point we would pursue foundation funding, although that's probably not likely to be a large piece, but probably an important piece. I think community fundraising is going to be necessary, and having people voting with their checkbooks, I think, is a very powerful message to the assembly. And quite frankly, I think it will take more general government fund support. So that's kind of where we're at. I expect not much to happen in the coming months, but round about February or March, where we roll out the funding plan for the budget or expenditure of that first year of the 1% sales tax. That would be game time for any advocate that's on that list to be looking. And probably a win for the museum would be to get on that list for 5% of the 2 million, 100,000-ish. And we would use that money, and we would assign a project manager, and Gary was still working for the city. There's a good chance that Gary would be working on the project, and we'd probably hire some consultants to start working on space planning and programming and business case and cost estimating. And everybody usually wants a visual of what something's going to look like. So we probably would do a preliminary architectural rendering, and we would have to develop a community process, for engaging the public. And so I think engaging the public, really step one is confirming location. Certainly, I think the waterfront it's my preferred location. I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but I think there's a lot of room to discuss that as well. So that's kind of what I thought I was going to do. Did you want me to say more or take questions or
Take some questions?
questions? Like questions on any city topic of your choosing? Anything? Kim?
Where is land available on the water?
So south of the parking garage. So the general idea, there's a big wooden decked over area that we named Elizabeth Petrovich Plaza, I think is a good contender. The gravel lot that is still owned by Morris Communications has been suggested by others. Build it on the land rather than on the decked over and leave the open space has been another one. There have been assembly members that have wanted to purchase that land for, I think, around 25 years. So I think that's possible. Those are the biggest obvious opportunities. I was in the grocery store before the election, and somebody said, you should build it over at the subport by the NCL dock, the one where they donated the land to Juneau-Douglas. There's probably arguments for that as well. So I think in a very broad way, we have to start kind of an alternatives analysis on location, right? Does everybody agree on location A, B, C, or D, and narrow it down and cement that location? And it'll be this. We'll loop back around to it as well. But that would be south of the parking garage.
So over the years, I know some of us have been involved in a couple of different planning efforts for the museum under prior to Beth's directorship. I know one time there was a consultant that was hired and developed some sort of plan, and then later that was sort of finessed again by a staff member. None of it ever really went forward or got adopted, but it might be some baseline information Because, what I see missing is having the concept of what we're going to be talking about, what are the living needs? And at that time, we were looking at alternatives, everywhere from building a new big building to house everything. Or is the museum better dispersed and have sort of satellite places that there are exhibits that are all managed by this? Obviously, the pros and cons of everything, but it might be worthwhile to keep that stuff can be looked at if there's any valuable information. But I think that's something that needs to go along with selecting a site. You need to know how big the building is and what's feasible, what's really needed. We don't want to get a situation like we got here. Say, well, we build an X number of square foot building because that's how much money it's already too small.
Yeah, right. What's the long-term plan? So, yeah, thanks, Gary. Nice to have some institutional memory. We can be lacking in, yeah, we can be lacking in that. I think kind of embedded in those comments is, it's agreeing on the purpose. Like, what purpose are we trying to meet, right? And if we agree that the purpose is a facility that appropriately houses our collections and meets the needs of the communities for the next 50 years, right? I think is the kind of purpose that you land on, and then you sort of say, okay, what's the size of the collections, and what's the collection growth look like, and therefore how much collection space are we going to need, and then I think you're in terms of your satellite concept, embedded in that is the operational costs, the efficiency to have one centralized facility versus programs that are maybe in more locations and maybe differently available to the public. Embedded in your question also is, should the museum archives be at the same location as the presentation hall, I'll call it. Pros and cons on that as well, right? So probably could build a cheaper storage facility offsite, but you're probably going to incur substantially higher staff cost if you're running back and forth with your collections, and damage to your collections is going to be very different as well. So I think embedded in that question is the purpose. What are we trying to achieve? And I think when we get together, I think what we're going to come up with is, hey, museums only going to get money once every 50 years. So let's do this right. And if it takes us, 4 years instead of 3 years, or 5 years instead of 4 years, let's do this right. Let's build the appropriate facility that meets our needs for the long haul. And I think weighs the pros and cons of our operational costs. And in that purpose statement, I think is, preservation of our collection.
I was going to say also, I like all the sites that you mentioned as possibilities. One of the things, in addition to the facility itself, that museums need is accessibility, and that would be not only for the mostly pedestrian tourists, but also for school buses and local visitors for getting here in their car. And one of the disadvantages of this site is not safe for school buses to drop off children here, and there's just no place for anyone to park. For sure, nearby.
Yeah, it might be our least accessible city facility. Like just kind of thinking it through. If you've got mobility impairments, is there a harder place to get to than this museum, right? If you're a teacher with a group of school kids, pretty hard.
They can sometimes be pretty creative, and I know they oftentimes will drop them off at the State Museum and walk them up here.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work for everybody. So that's something to consider. And that's something I chew my fingers nails about South Franklin.
Yeah.
Unless you can park in the parking lot.
Yeah.
You can get creative with that.
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about downtown South Franklin, and we're talking about Juneau as a community, we don't want to have a museum that's not accessible to our citizens, right? And I think if you do it wrong, and the museum is in the tourist zone, probably the worst outcome is you create a tourist trap that pays for itself and nobody in Juneau goes there.
Especially in winter.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think there, when you make a change this big, there's a lot of pitfalls. And it's really worth trying to game out what may happen. My initial proposal really, and maybe this is bad logic or maybe it's good logic. And I think the logic was if we put the museum downtown, it gives Juneau citizens more of a reason to go to the waterfront, right? So part of the criticism of the commercialization of the waterfront is it's all tourists, right? But part of that is we don't go there enough. If we don't want it to be all tourists and we want something blended. So I try to lean on my own personal vacationing, and I try to think about what things look like when I'm a tourist and when I go places. And I like the places that locals also go to. And I was just fortunate enough to spend time in Scotland and London and Greece. And so, I was a tourist for a lot of that. And saw a lot of things that have been done really well and a lot of things maybe not so great. So I think we have to think pretty hard about that. In some ways, the museum is about the community putting its past and present on its best foot forward. Tremendous opportunity. It's my favorite project on the list. It's my personal project. So I've been advocating for it and probably pushing the assembly harder than they would prefer a couple times.
Because you wanted to be a history professor.
I did want to be a history professor. Yeah. Yes. Careers not taken.
We have a question on Zoom here.
Okay.
Asking, can you describe the Morris property location?
Yes. So the Morris property is, if you go to the Marine Park, I guess I should talk to the person, Marine Park garage and library, and you keep going down South Franklin, there's a big gravel yard that's got a fence around it, and it's where the food trucks were up until several years ago. And I'll tell you the story on that. So Mr. Morris, who used to own the Empire, back in the heyday when the newspaper business was good, times change. He acquired that property. He previously had other commercial properties in Juneau on Front Street, and was ultimately persuaded to sell those properties and acquire this property on the waterfront. He had a vision that he would have a place to display his art collection. So any of you who've been in the Empire Building over the years, he had quite a collection of Alaskan art. He had his own curator who would seek out pieces and collect them for him. And in his hometown of Augusta, Georgia, he worked very hard to create a museum in downtown Augusta. And he helped acquire a collection of Southern art and worked towards the development of that museum. And at the opening, and I'm blanking on the details of the financing, but I think he was a major financier of the project, and he dedicated the museum in memory of his parents. And I think to this day, it's the largest collection of Southern art. It's a neat facility. My father, when he was alive, lived in Savannah. And one time that I went to visit him, I went to visit Mr. Morris, and I toured the Augusta Museum, and I toured his offices, and it was really fun. And his offices were really interesting. Right in downtown Augusta, and in a tall office building. And the architecture of the building was very much, power architecture, like heavy, deep, expensive wood trim, thinking of like the newspaper editor of the 70s and 80s, like, right? I mean, it's like you needed the newspaper editor on your side. And, I mean, I think his newspaper and media and communications company did quite the arc of life. Grew, and then the internet came and then suffered. And amazingly, walking through his office, I'm like looking around, I'm like, this is full of Alaskan art. That was the dominant feature on the walls, was Alaskan art. Maybe not 100%, but I'm saying 80 or 90% of it was Alaskan art. So the collection that we have here is a subset of what he had. He saved his favorite pieces. He had a lot of Alaskan art and still does to this day. When he came here last, he gave a little speech, and when he was proposing to do a land trade with the city on the waterfront and development of the, what we then called the Archipelago Project. And he talked about Juneau in the first person we. He very much felt part of the community. And he talked about fighting capital move initiatives in the we, when we did this in the 60s, when we did this in the 70s. So Alaska was very, very important to Mr. Morris. And I think he would be thrilled to have his art collection available to the public.
Any other questions?
No other random city questions. Well, thank you.
Wow. That needs to.
Yeah, right. Just one. Okay, well, thank you for having me, and happy to come back whenever. And Beth, you can reach out to me on timing of the sales tax, and if this group wants to advocate for that first tranche of funding. You've got the holiday season, and then shortly after the holiday season is probably when you make a bit of an effort.
Rory, I'll ask one question. What are the other competing entities, and where do they fall on the prioritize?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, that was
the assembly.
well, there's 9 of them, so where they fall can change by the day. So we have funding for childcare, which is going to be an annual program. So it'll be 5 years of childcare. Is it $1 million a year? Do you remember? How's good your memory? Well, it's
not $1 million, it's less.
It's less.
I think it's 400 a year.
Okay, so childcare, general deferred building maintenance, fixing all kinds of city things, school facility maintenance.
And there park stuff in there.
Well, there was the parks bond.
The smoke and roll pack?
Is Aurora Harbor on?
Boy, I don't remember. This was May. I mean, come on, that was a long time ago.
That was my.
We can send the museum director a spreadsheet and she can disperse it. But yeah, I think they're probably on the order of 15-ish different funding ideas. $2 million Telephone Hill. Another thing that I think fits in this discussion. So we believe the state is going to convey Telephone Hill to the city around the first of the year. We've just put out an RFP for a planning process. What do we do with Telephone Hill? North State Office Building parking garage. So kind of over the bank here is a increasingly dilapidated parking structure between the State Office Building and Firewood Place. It's structurally deficient. And this year in the legislature, $5 million was appropriated as a grant to CBJ to do something with that state facility. We put it on our list for $5 million as well. So there's $10 million for parking. Nobody really loves spending money on parking, but everybody loves the land that you free up when you create parking.
Will they be adding levels or just fixed ones there?
We don't have a plan, but I think it's a tear down and start over. And so there's an idea that structure gets torn down back into the hillside, doesn't create a parking garage that has a view plane issue, and there's some connection up to Calhoun and makes the legislature's life easier. I think that's the idea. So I've described that as many layers or floors of parking as we can afford.
Isn't docks and harbors in that bucket of money too?
But they should be.
Harbor expansion. Gary mentioned it, Harbor.
Aurora. So the latest phase of harbor rehabilitation of the old facilities.
And then Wayside Park.
Oh, right. Well, right. So at Salmon Creek, there's that little park that's north of DIPAC. There's a fishing float that's accessible, some funds there to rehabilitate Wayside Park, and then there's some aging facilities in Taku Harbor as well on the harbor side.
Affordable Housing Fund, Peterson Hill, IC, child care, Father Creek multimodal path, budget reserve.
Budget reserve. Okay, so the budget reserve, what we used to call the rainy day budget reserve. So as inflation has made the municipal budget more expensive, the size of the rainy day budget reserve needs to be larger. IT is the new kind of infrastructure, right? That's not the bricks and mortars infrastructure, but everybody wants us to have computer systems that work so they can do their business with the city efficiently. We're behind. It's really hard to spend money on IT. And the tough thing about IT is it lasts, costs a terrible amount of money, and it lasts 5 to 7 years. It's really, really quite awful. Childcare, we mentioned. Affordable Housing Fund, grants to people to build housing. Peterson Hill, more development of municipal land for housing. Lemon Creek multimodal path, some type of bike pedestrian walkway that skirts the Lemon Creek industrial area going through the wetlands. Radios for the police department. Yeah. Huh? Oh, and a ladder truck, right? And a ladder truck for the fire department. Well, there's your political sausage making, right? I mean, it's so there's always this debate with the assembly on the sales tax. Do we give the voters the chance on every one of these things, or do we bundle it all together? And bundling it together, in my view, is that's what's coalition building. We don't have enough percentage of the community that supports harbors. So if you put harbors all on its own, it probably dies. If you put museum all on its own, it probably dies. If you put Eagle Crest all on its own, it probably dies. But all together, I think it's one of those we're better together type things. Yeah. Thanks for the memory. Thank you all.
Was the IT.
Okay.
I think you're up next.
I think so. Okay, well, thank you everybody for being here. I have a couple things just to update everybody on as far as the museum goes. So go ahead to the next. First off is visitation. We report to the city through Parks and Recs on visitation. So you can see the previous 2 years were pretty discouraging when COVID was happening, but we came right back up to more than ever. So I think next year is even going to be better, but this is fiscal year, I think, not calendar year. I've also been tracking some of our statistics online as well and keeping track of things on various other places for reach through Facebook and Instagram. And then our followers on both of those platforms. So we've grown the Facebook audience quite a bit. We're still working on growing Instagram more. And Next one. Our YouTube is now got over, it's got, let's see, 49 videos available to watch there. And you'll see the icons right here are from this previous grant project that I'd been working on with regards to the artworks that came through the city grant during COVID, the pandemic artworks. And so there's 12 featured videos now of these artists that you can watch on our YouTube page, along with past things that had to do with when we were closed or reduced. We had Nico, our past curator, was doing a lot of different making of videos and things like that. I forgot to introduce Corey to anybody that hasn't met her yet. She's our new curator of collections and exhibitions. So she's been a great help as she's learning all the things that we do here. In programs, we did 33 programs last year and really only just one by Zoom. So that is a big change from when we were in COVID times. 1,998 people participating. I have up there, we had a little Elizabeth Pratrovich challenge, I guess, to go around the museum and learn a little bit about her during that day. Our true crime walking tours with Betsy Longabaugh and Ed Schoenfeld are still really popular, along with other walking tours. Rich does our one over at Treadwell. And then Walter Soboleff Day is what's yesterday, but we're celebrating that this month. And I didn't even include the numbers in there. We had the high school contact us for 600 note cards. So all the high school students at JDHS could write a letter and put the insert in. So that number is just going to go poo because of all the students that are doing that today. We've also continued to do our Capitol tours. We provided 153 tours over at the Capitol via the Legislative Affairs Agency. We have a memorandum of agreement to do that with 1,462 visitors doing that. And then in our walking tours, we had 54 tours and 303 visitors do those. So some really rebounding, wonderful numbers for our programs. In collections, I had Corey put together a little bit of information for me, 32 accessions with 94 associated objects, photos, archival materials, things like that. You can see the breakdown. And that also does not include the 197 sketchbooks that we received from Juan Munoz from the Rorie Munoz collection, which you can still see some of that in this adjacent room here. But a couple of the, I thought, fun things that we received is this ringer box brought in by Nyla Trustin and her husband. He used to work for the phone company, so that's kind of a cool thing from 1918. And this photo was donated as well. It's a winter in pond, and Corey comes to us from the San Diego Museum of Art, and she's one of her specialties is photographic images and art. And so she's put in her little planning for exhibitions, a winter in pond exhibition in 25 or 26. Interestingly, I don't know if you want to tell them, but she's been doing some research and there's never been a real big look into winter in pond. Like, I think we just take for granted that they're so prolific and known here that no one's really written anything in depth about them, right?
Yeah, there's one publication from the University of Washington that focuses on their depictions of Native people and indigenous material culture. But as far as their entire body of work, especially how it relates to the city of Juneau, where they operated for 50 years, hasn't been done. So that's something that I'm not really looking.
Yeah, so that's going to be exciting. And next one. Also another Rorie Munoz that came to us, and that Corey told me made that 26 works of art by Rorie Munoz in our collection. So we have quite a wonderful collection of that art. And a couple of projects that Gary's been getting on me about. We are planning some conservation or interpretation for a couple of the large outdoor objects in our collection. The 5 stamp mill is going to need some conservation and protection in some way. So we're starting to think about that. And then also the what we've called the 4-story pole for a long time. Those of you with Gastineau Channel Historical Society or who visited at SHI when Dr. Emily Moore spoke at those 2 venues found a whole new plethora of information from Viola Davis's notes, who was an anthropologist when this was carved by John Wallace. And so this is a completely different interpretation of this pole. Instead of 4 stories, it's really 1 story about Sawan, a shaman who goes through a lot of different phases that the pole tells the story of to obtain halibut hooks. So this is a really big deal. And so as you can see in the smaller picture there, we're calling it now as a working title Sawan, but we'll work with Lee Wallace to help his grandson, John's grandson, to think about the new name, and other Indigenous partners will help us vet how we do some new interpretation signs for that pole, as well as we'll put up a new sign for the harnessing the atom. And some of the work that needs to be done in 2018, we did have some work done on the pole, but that did not really last. So the toes and the coromant that's at the bottom have fallen off, and we have them safely secured downstairs, but we need to kind of figure out what's better rather than just re-gluing them kind of through a museum approved conservation program, how we can make that fix to that. In exhibitions, we had a very successful summer exhibition with the Munoz retrospective portrait of Alaska. The Munoz family has been very generous in helping us put that together and loaning us things and donating things. So that was really successful. And we have our upcoming season here of solo artists. So those of you in the room are enjoying Carrie Kirkpatrick's Capturing the Light exhibition. She's our first solo artist for the season. In December, we'll have Mary McEwen, and she does a lot of work with recycled materials. She's known as a quilter and other sort of fabrication types, things like that. And then in January, we have a shared solo artist exhibition by Christine Carpenter and Elizabeth Jerglight. And they're really looking at landscapes in a lot of different perspectives. So kind of a micro to a maybe more macro view of things. And then in February, we have a really special thing happening for our children. The artists are Lily Hope, Shigen George, and Ricky Tagaban, but it's really more than that, because Lily has undertaken, and these artists have undertaken, helping teach Chilkat weaving to 30 students. So there'll be 30 Chilkat baby robes that will be created in January that will then be part of this exhibition, with possibly some other smaller things. But you'll hear a little bit more about that in another second here. So grants that the City Museum has received, we really mostly closed out a lot of the ones that we had, the Artworks grant that we had through the SLAM, and some operations things that we had through the Humanities Forum, and then the raising of the Wushkitan Totem Pole collection management grant from Museums Alaska. So we closed all those things out. We have one grant right now from the National Trust for Historic Preservation for $50,000, which is also funded it's kind of a pass from ARPA money, which is the second round of pandemic funding that came. CARES was first, then ARPA was second. That came to the National Humanities, and then National Humanities had the National Trust for Historic Preservation distribute that. So that's how it came to us. And we'll be working on researching and designing, and eventually bringing a exhibition here on the burning of the Douglas Indian Village, or I'm going to practice Anak Ya Andaganye, which is that space that's over in Douglas that was taken by the city of Douglas at the time in 1962 and burned and turned into other things. So we're working on that, and we're working with KTOO on that as well for a documentary that they'll be creating as well. Kind of flashing back to last year or 2 years ago when you guys saw this presentation, we needed to get the Wushkitan totem pole reinstalled, and we had permission from the state to do it over in the state office building. So just kind of reminding you, this was 1981, carved by Nathan Jackson. It was at Centennial Hall for a long time, then in storage. And then next one, we moved it from storage, one storage place to another, but then we moved it from the Thane storage over to the state office building in October of 2021. And then we were able to raise it and reinstall it. So I thought I'd just share a few of the photos from that day because it was a really special day that we got to be part of. There's it being moved. That was just a spectacular photo. So the day started off with a blessing by Wishkitan and Occoquan and various other Indigenous partners, and AELNP and our contractor, Jeff, there in the front, started moving the pole towards where it was going to be raised. And they got it going up, and their first try didn't quite work out because they had never lifted something quite that heavy and they didn't have enough heavy duty block and tackle. So this is kind of part of the first try in that one photo. But eventually they got a second try, and you can see additional block and tackle in the picture on the left. And then one AELNP guy and our contractor Jeff got up there on ladders, and just it was very stressful, but it got up. And we had a successful raising, and everybody just was rejoicing because we thought it would just go boom, 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 or we hoped, but it took all morning and we were still putting things away when the celebration started. And it was a really wonderful event that we live streamed, and you can see that live stream on our YouTube page if you want to go back and revisit. Nathan Jackson was, of course, honored. And I had Rosita write a little bit about how Wuching happened, sort of this the Ravens, showed some of their regalia and objects, and then their belongings, and then they reciprocated, the Eagles reciprocated with showing some of their things. So it was a really wonderful thing. There was dancing and drumming, and you can see their photograph there in front, and then now it's sitting like that. We still need to put interpretive sign up over there, but it was a huge undertaking that cost lots of money. So thank you if you helped with that. And I really appreciated my fellow coworkers for the city, especially Steve Tata and Jennifer Mannix, who helped me through some of the rough spots that happened. We also had we awarded the 2022 Marie Darlin Prize, which is a major part of what the Friends helps us with. Here you can see we awarded it to Maureen Longworth, and our first time awarding it was Ernestine Hayes. So this is our second time awarding it with Kirk, our treasurer, Mary Lou, our president, and Mandy Malott, who's representing the Juneau Community Foundation. This is where we store all that money over at the Community Foundation for a variety of things. And a little bit about Maureen, really focusing a little bit more on her play Blue Ticket. It came back out again as a film version, and she's just been a wonderful advocate for LGBTQ+. So this was part of her nomination, and a quote there that you can partly see here if you're in the room, but probably all of you can see if you're online. And I did want to just also mention that the Friends paid for us to be part of the American Alliance of Museums 2022 annual survey of museum goers. It's sort of a kickoff to some of the strategic planning that we'll be doing, because our strategic plan expired probably back in like 2019 or 2020. And my boss, John, really wants me to do some more strategic planning, and we've accomplished a lot of the things that were on the strategic plan. So that's a good thing to kind of get us going, but I'll give you just a couple of the results. So we had 186 museums participated in this all across the country. It was fielded back in the beginning of 2022 for a couple months. And there was different ways people were able to participate. Go ahead to the next one. Our sample size was 137 and a response rate of 55%. So the woman who conducts this thought that was an amazing response, but we did share this out through the CBJ media ways. And so we probably got more people in our response rate that don't actually come to the museum. So she thought that was kind of interesting as well. So a couple things about why they visit. I'm actually going to need to see those things there. So mostly they were really, people are of course wanting to learn. We're the blue, I think, in the middle there compared to all museums and history museums only, as well as they're interested in something. And you can see some of the other reasons why people might visit, but those seem to be the top ones along with curiosity. So really just wanting to know more about our community and what we have here. You have to click back on the camp. And then what do we do well was one of the questions, and contributions to quality of life. Our staff makes people feel welcome. We were happy to see that. They enjoy special events like First Friday and things like that. And our exhibits were up there as well. Things people weren't really interested in were things like parenting or caregiving, which we don't have a very child-friendly museum. I can admit to that. And people weren't really interested in more things to do with your phones or how to look at things with extra information and stuff like that. Things we could do better, changing our exhibits more. These are things that we can start working into our strategic planning. Things like more children's programs and a broader community outreach. So just a few things just to give you a sense. We probably won't do it again this year. It's a little expensive, but it's nice to just get some feedback from the community on a few things. Some of the things people preferred, of course, are exhibits and original objects, and our shop was in there, not too high up, and hands-on things. So things that help us understand where we need to improve, where we think people enjoy, or what people are preferring. Again, the impact mostly through telling the story of Juneau-Douglas City Museum. People felt that was something we did as an impact, or it impacted them, and providing educational experiences and preserving collections. So all things that are important. That's the end of my update. Anybody have any questions? I'm happy to answer. All right, David, you can take back over for the home stretch here.
Okay, so trip this over. I guess Kirk, can give us a little update on the money situation.
Yep.
That's always exciting, isn't it? The money situation. So, boy, this is gonna be weird standing here talking to all of you, but the camera right here. So there's a joke that goes around the group here about our financial situation. And the joke is that no matter what, the balance in our checking account is always around $30,000, plus or minus 1,000 or so either way. Doesn't matter what comes in or what we spend, it's just going to be around 30,000. And once again, that holds pretty true. So I will tell you our dollar amounts right now that we have on hand. We have $10,004 in our savings account.
I rounded up just.
Thank you. Well, you rounded down in the 10,000 department. That $4, I think, is very important to mention. We have just over 31,000 in checking. So as I said, we're staying true to our historic balance there. And we do have a grant that came in that we are administering on behalf of Lily Hope. That is for $15,000, and the money came in last month and will begin going out in 2023. So that is actually in our checking account. So it artificially bumps our account to a little over $51,000 at the moment, but that is not our money per se. I just want to be clear. We control it for the moment, but it is not ours. The next thing to move on to is the JCF, which is currently standing at about $168,000. This represents approximately a $40,000 decline over previous years, and that is owing to the economy. The market has taken a hit, and so have we as a result. This is also the funding source for the Marie Darling Prize. So this is of concern to us and something that we are watching pretty carefully. We are in this for the long haul, though. We do expect that As the effects of the pandemic wane and we get back to a normal practice in the country and our economy begins to rebound, that we will see this turn around and grow again, like any other investment account. We also use this portion of this money for the history grants, I should mention. So the operating expenses for the Friends of the Museum come from the checking account, which, as I said, has around $31,000 in it at the moment. These are investments that fund our grants and prizes, and the savings account is just there for rainy days. But once again, we're doing well. We are remaining solid year after year, roughly at the same dollar level. I don't know how the rebound always happens that way, but it does. And
Because of your budget.
because we budget. And we actually do pretty well on our budget. We do use an accounting software to manage these issues, and that helps us project out year to year what our budget is going to be. And we were expecting a deficit this year, but surprise, surprise, we came in a little over $7,000 to the good
So far.
so far. We still have a couple of weeks left in the year. So hopefully we'll continue to be strong. And this is something that the entire board pays attention to and works on. And we are very concerned about maintaining our financial picture, our what's the word I'm looking for? Solvency, that's the word. And I am confident that we will continue to do so in the future. Does anyone have any questions for me on that? No. All right, I get to get out from in front of the camera. Thank you very much.
I can talk about this if you want. Just a little bit of an update on membership and how we figured that out as well. So 2022 current number of members is 101. So last year at this time, that was the exact same number of members that we had. And I went back through 2021s and finished out the year. So it went from 101 to 113. So there's a possibility that, you'll have a few more members who renew or whatever through our process. And then in membership income, 7,275 is brought in. And then the benefits that are paid out, which are your annual membership to the museum and walking tours and things like that, are paid to the museum, 3,372. So then over on the right-hand side, you can see that the Friends retains 3,903 of that amount. A lot of donations happened as well outside of like membership. So in particular, we have a donor who is able to match through their company. So a $2,000 donation matches, their company matches 2,000. So a big portion of that is from that. And that's Mario Madden, the president's son who works for Microsoft. And then also Pick, Click, Give, 1,628. That's grown every year. It's not a great amount, but it's enough that we think it's a good investment of the application fee that you have to pay. So, Friends total, sort of kind of an income total, 15,368 from these three things that have to do with donations and memberships. All right, now it's your turn again.
So, okay, so now we're at the board membership election.
Right.
So,
So you have two people whose terms are expiring, Jean McBrien and Mary Pat Wyatt. Both have expressed interest in remaining on the board. However, Mary Pat, if there's somebody else who has interest, Mary Pat is also happy to go spend more time in Italy, I think. So if there's any other nomination or someone needs to nominate them, I guess. We can entertain a nomination for that.
yes, would anyone like to self-nominate or nominate someone else to be on the board? Okay, Looks like-
Ask for a motion for.
Sure.
Jean?
I feel like I'm like the puppet up here. I don't know how to run a meeting formally, even though I spend my life in meetings at the university. Would anyone like to make a motion that we offer Jean and Mary Pat the opportunity to serve on the board for another year, or is it 2-year term?
2 years.
2-year term.
I'll go ahead and make a motion.
All right, Kirk. Do we have the second? Okay. But Don will be our second this time.
Or
Okay, hearing no, any discussion, any objections? Okay, I'm assuming unanimous consent based on your silence. So, great.
Robert's rules of order. Okay, that's-
Okay,
Wait,
and
let
then
me go back.
I think we got goals for 23.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time, we'll skip over those things since Mary's not here. And ask for any other member comments before we join. Want to adjourn the meeting?
Yes, we have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
And a second. All right, all right. Meeting adjourned. Thanks for coming.
Okay, and thank you to those of you on the webinar for joining us as well.